Her bloody fingerprint. The only clue left behind. Welcome to WordScript Den. I am your host, Nero. Tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Your comments bring this mystery to life. Let's begin. I'd have been perfectly happy spending that Tuesday the way it had started. Half a cup of coffee down the hatch. My shoes shined, and the morning mail sorted into Wolfe's usual 3 piles. Bills he wouldn't pay until the last possible minute. Magazines he pretended not to read. And invitations he wouldn't attend, even if they promised to serve him truffles in champagne sauce. The brownstone was operating on schedule, which meant Wolfe was in the plant rooms communing with his orchids, and I was sitting at my desk, thinking about what excuse I could invent to get out for lunch. That's when the bell rang. Now, there's nothing unusual about the doorbell ringing on West 35th Street. People drop by for all sorts of reasons, to hire Wolfe, to sell him something, or to deliver things he doesn't want. But there's a certain tone to the ring that tells you what kind of trouble's about to cross the threshold. This one wasn't a neighbor looking for directions or a delivery boy with a crate of beer. It was sharp, urgent, and long enough to make me think the ringer wasn't going away without an answer. I opened the door to find a man who looked like he'd spent the last 12 hours losing a fistfight with his conscience. He was in his 30s, medium height, suit wrinkled from either travel or neglect, and his eyes darted like a man trying to convince himself the street was still safe. "You Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. His voice cracked just enough to suggest he wasn't used to introducing himself under pressure. "I've been accused of it," I said. "And you are?" "Name's Clifford Ralston. I need to see Mr. Wolfe right now." That kind of urgency usually meant one of 2 things. Either he was selling something no one wanted, or he was desperate enough to pay Wolfe's rates. I stepped aside. "Come in, but don't expect a warm handshake just yet. Wolfe's got orchids to woo until 11. You're early in his world." Ralston entered like a man who'd crossed a desert and found water he wasn't sure was clean. He glanced around the office, at Wolfe's massive desk, the red leather chair, the globe in the corner, as if memorizing it for a police sketch. I motioned him to the red leather client chair, but he stayed standing, jittery. "Mr. Goodwin, this is going to sound odd. I think I'm being followed. And not by the police. Someone else. Someone dangerous." I raised an eyebrow. That's usually the kind of story people tell after they've been caught doing something dumb. "What's your version?" He swallowed hard. "I can't say yet. Not until I speak to Wolfe. It's complicated, but I have proof that someone's after me. Proof I shouldn't have. I could have sent him packing until Wolfe was ready, but the man's hands were shaking enough to water Wolfe's orchids. I decided he might at least be worth a line in the daily log. Fine, sit tight until 11. Wolfe doesn't like his orchids interrupted by nervous men, unless they're named Rockefeller or Roosevelt. He finally collapsed into the chair, wringing his hands. I busied myself with a crossword to avoid staring at him. Nervous clients either spill the beans too fast or clam up too tight. And I wasn't sure which camp he belonged to. At 10:59 sharp, the sound of Wolfe's footsteps came down the hall, the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man who considered haste a crime against civilization. He entered the office in his usual mustard-yellow dressing gown, glanced once at Ralston, and lowered himself into his throne behind the desk. "You may speak," Wolfe said, as if granting permission for the earth to keep spinning. Ralston licked his lips. "Mr. Wolfe, I believe someone's trying to kill me. That woke me up faster than my morning coffee." Wolfe raised his brows a fraction, which for him was the equivalent of a double take. "Indeed, why?" "I don't know," Ralston said, voice trembling. "All I know is I found something I shouldn't have. And last night, when I got home, there was a mark left on my apartment door. A bloody fingerprint, just one, like a warning." Silence followed. Wolfe studied him as if he were an insect under glass. I leaned forward. "A bloody fingerprint?" "That's a new one. What did you do, scrub it off or frame it for the mantel?" "I photographed it," Ralston said quickly, fumbling in his coat pocket. He produced a small envelope and slid it across the desk. Wolfe didn't touch it. He just looked at me, which meant you handle it, Archie. I opened the envelope and pulled out a glossy black and white print. Sure enough, it showed the faint outline of a single fingerprint on a doorframe, dark against the paint. Whether it was ketchup, paint, or the real thing, I couldn't say, but it had the kind of theatrical flair you'd expect from someone sending a message. Wolfe finally spoke. "And you think this was placed as a warning?" Yes, I don't know who did it, but I know it has to do with papers I came across. Company papers. They prove something dangerous. I can't say more here. He hesitated, then added, unless you take the case. I could practically see Wolfe's shoulders stiffen. He didn't like being pressed, especially by men who thought dangling half a secret was the way to his heart. He steepled his fingers. Mr. Ralston, I have no intention of traipsing after bloody smudges or corporate paperwork. You must be explicit or you may depart. Ralston leaned forward desperately. Please, if I tell you everything, I'll be signing my death warrant. But if you help me, if you even just look at these papers, I'll pay your fee double. That got my attention. Wolfe's too, though he concealed it under a sigh. Money wasn't the only motivator for Wolfe, but insult his dignity or offer a challenge, and he suddenly found himself interested. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair. Very well. Leave the papers. Archie will catalogue them. You will return tomorrow at 4, at which point I will inform you whether I accept your case. Ralston stood abruptly. Tomorrow? I don't know if I'll still be alive tomorrow. That, Wolfe said calmly, is your problem until I decide to make it mine. I escorted Ralston out and he left in a hurry, glancing up and down the street like a man expecting gunfire. When I came back, Wolfe was staring at the photograph I'd left on his desk. Archie, he said slowly, we are being maneuvered. I shrugged. Maybe, or maybe he's just scared stiff. Either way, you've got his papers now. Want me to take a peek? Do so discreetly and call Saul Panzer. I will require vigilance on Mr. Ralston's movements, which was Wolfe speak for something smells, and it isn't the orchids. By the time I tucked the envelope under my arm and headed for my desk, I had the distinct feeling we'd just had our day rearranged by a bloody fingerprint. This section sets the hook, introduces Clifford Ralston, a jittery client, plants the mystery of the bloody fingerprint as a warning, establishes Wolfe's disinterest turned curiosity, Archie's. Witty narration frames the tension Duran's. With Wolfe already suspecting manipulation, would you like me to keep each section around 1,200, 1,400 words so the full story lands neatly in the 12K, 14K range? Or do you prefer slightly shorter, 1,000, 1,200 for sharper pacing? The thing about Wolfe is, when he says discreetly, what he really means is with enough detail that I don't have to get up. But without so much noise, I have to hear you doing it. So after Ralston had skittered out like a rabbit with hawks circling, I sat down at my desk with the envelope he'd left behind. Inside were 3 folded sheets, typewritten, and a smaller handwritten note clipped to the top. The paper smelled faintly of machine oil and the kind of dust that hangs around filing cabinets nobody's opened since Eisenhower was in office. I skimmed it, taking my time. Ralston hadn't been bluffing. The documents were a set of internal memos from something called Kellerman Industries. Name rang a bell, but just barely, like a tune you can almost hum but not quite remember. The memos hinted at irregularities in contracts, shifting funds through shell subsidiaries, and buried in the 3rd page, an item about liabilities being managed through termination of key personnel. Not termination in the HR sense. More like termination, in the kind of sense that leaves coroners with overtime. The handwritten note was worse. It was a scrawl hurried, no name signed. Cliff, you don't know what you've touched. Return them. Forget you ever saw this, or there will be blood. Subtle as a sledgehammer, I laid the papers on Wolfe's desk. He hadn't moved since Ralston left. His eyes were half closed, lips pursed, as if he'd been listening to his orchids argue about photosynthesis. Well, he asked, either our friend stumbled into a crooked corporate scheme, or he's a very imaginative fiction writer. These memos talk about contract fraud, payoffs, and maybe even murder dressed up as business losses. I gave him the note. And this little gem suggests somebody thinks a bloody fingerprint is more convincing than a cease and desist. Wolfe read it, grunted, and set it aside. Crude, to be expected of those whose minds are base. The difficulty, Archie, lies not in determining whether the threat is real, but in deciding whether we should involve ourselves. You told him to come back tomorrow. He looked like a man who wouldn't survive until lunch. Exaggeration, histrionics. If he is truly in peril, Saul will confirm. Wolfe shifted in his chair, which for him was like other men pacing the room. Have you called him? I dialed Saul Panzer and gave him the gist. He agreed to shadow Ralston discreetly. with the efficiency of a man who'd once tailed a bank robber straight through Times Square without losing sight of his hat. When I hung up, Wolfe had leaned back with his eyes shut. That meant his brain was sorting, filing, and cooking the stew of facts until the flavor pleased him. By noon, nothing had exploded, literally or figuratively, so I took the chance to duck out for a sandwich. When I got back, the brownstone felt too quiet, like the pause before a phone rings with bad news. I went up to the plant rooms, checked on Fritz arranging trays of sandwiches for Wolfe, then came back down. Wolfe hadn't moved, but the photograph of the fingerprint still sat on his desk like an accusation. "Wolfe," I said, "this smells." That print, the note, and the way Ralston bolted. Somebody wanted to scare him witless. Maybe it worked. Maybe too well. His eyes opened, dark and steady. "Archie, the essence of intimidation is theater. A bloody fingerprint is a performance, designed to terrify without substance. Unless," he paused and the room held its breath. "Unless it is also a signature," I asked, "meaning?" "Meaning some men cannot resist leaving a mark. They flourish, a claim of authorship. If this is such, it is not warning but declaration. And declarations carry consequences. We didn't have long to philosophize. At 3 o'clock the phone rang. I picked it up. Saul's voice, calm as always but edged. "Archie, your Mr. Ralston just got picked up. Not by the cops. 2 men, dark sedan, corner of 10th and 47th. He didn't fight. They put him in the back seat and drove off west." "West where?" "Toward the river." I tailed, but they shook me near 12th. They knew they were followed. I thanked him, hung up, and relayed it. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his hand tapped once against the armrest. That was his version of swearing out loud. "So much for tomorrow at 4, I said. "Looks like somebody didn't like the idea of him shopping those papers." "Pfui. We are being drawn, Archie. I dislike being led by the nose. Then maybe we get ahead. Want me to try tracing Kellerman Industries? See who they really are?" "Yes. Begin with the Secretary of State's filings, then the press archives. Confine your inquiries to the offices of the Gazette and Times. Take the car. Fritz will have dinner at the usual hour. Do not be late. That was Wolfe for you. A man might be abducted and staring at a shallow grave, but heaven forbid I miss trout souffle. Still, orders were orders. I locked the papers in the safe, grabbed my hat and headed for the door. As I closed it behind me, Wolfe's voice followed, low and firm. "Archie, be wary. The bloody fingerprint may not have been for Mr. Ralston alone." That sent a chill down my back, sharper than the autumn wind outside. "Word count, 1,000, no less, no more. This section escalates the case. Archie examines the papers. Saul tails Ralston, and Ralston is abducted. Wolfe suspects the fingerprint is not just a warning but a signature, setting the stage for deeper danger. Would you like me to keep pushing forward with Archie's fieldwork in Section 3, digging into Kellerman Industries and suspects, or focus next on Wolfe maneuvering suspects into the brownstone? I hit the Gazette first. They keep their archives in a basement that smells like yellowing paper and stale ambition, but they've got files that go back farther than most people's patience. The clerk down there knew me, word gets around when you're Nero Wolfe's legman, and didn't make me sign anything more incriminating than the visitor log. I asked for Kellerman Industries, and he raised an eyebrow like I'd asked for the lost works of Shakespeare. Still, he disappeared into the back and came out with a stack of clippings. I skimmed until my eyes blurred. Kellerman started as a modest import-export firm, branched into chemicals, and then somehow ballooned into contracts with defense suppliers. The articles were vague on details, but there were whispers of labor disputes, lawsuits hushed before trial, and one case where a former executive conveniently resigned and then conveniently fell off a boat near Albany. No charges filed, no questions answered. The kind of story that dies after 2 weeks, because the advertisers make sure it dies. By the time I got to the Times, I already had a picture forming. Kellerman played rough, had friends in high places, and didn't mind losing the occasional man overboard if it kept their ledgers clean. The Times files filled in the shading, congressional inquiries that never led anywhere, donations to certain senators, and one headline that froze me mid-page. Local accountant missing, feared foul play. The man's name? Clifford Ralston, not our jittery visitor, but his older brother. Missing 3 years back, never found. I folded that clipping carefully and slid it into my pocket. When I got back to the brownstone, the office was thick with Wolfe's presence, which means the air felt like he'd claimed it by sheer mass. He was in his chair, eyes closed, lips pursed, fingers tapping on the armrest. Fritz had brought in beer, and Wolfe had drained half the bottle without a word. I dropped the folder on his desk and handed him the Ralston clipping. His eyes opened just enough to scan it. "Ah," he said, voice low, "so the brother has vanished." "Not vanished, wiped. 3 years ago, and now Clifford number 2 shows up with papers that look like they came out of Kellerman's closet." "That's not coincidence, Wolfe. That's family business," he nodded once. It clarifies his agitation. The bloody fingerprint was less a warning than a message. History repeats. That was grim enough to make me wish for a shot of bourbon. Instead, the phone rang. I picked it up, and Saul's voice came over, calm but edged. "Archie, you'd better tell Wolfe I lost them." 2 men with Ralston drove down toward the docks. I followed, but they switched cars. I tried to track the plates, nothing. Either stolen or scrubbed. I thanked him and hung up. Wolfe hadn't moved, but his eyes had the look he gets when the puzzle pieces click into a shape nobody likes. "They will dispose of him," he said quietly. "Unless he still possesses utility." "Which means what?" "Which means, Archie, that if Ralston is not already dead, he is bait. They know he sought me out. They know he left something here. They will attempt to recover it, or destroy us with it." I asked, "Want me to call Kramer? Maybe the police care about kidnappings as much as we do." "No." Wolfe's tone could have frozen soup. "Kramer's bluster would scatter what little scent we have. Kellerman's tendrils reach too far. No, Archie, we must advance without the burden of officialdom. That meant the ball was in my court. Wolfe doesn't step foot outside the house unless fire drives him, so it was up to me to stir the pot." He leaned forward slightly, which in Wolfe terms was equivalent to another man leaping on a table. "You will visit Kellerman Industries tomorrow morning. Make an appointment under the pretext of a routine inquiry. Observe who trembles, who blusters, and who evades. And if they ask why Nero Wolfe's right-hand man is snooping around, tell them nothing. Avoid unsettles men more than a threat." I said fine, but I wasn't thrilled. Kellerman smelled like sharks, and I was being sent to swim without a cage. Still, Wolfe wasn't wrong. We needed faces to go with the memos. I locked the papers back in the safe and checked my gun, though I didn't expect it to do much against corporate muscle. That night, Wolfe and I ate dinner in silence. He brooded over squab and sweetbreads, while I kept replaying the bloody fingerprint in my head. Somewhere in the city, Clifford Ralston might be tied to a chair waiting for the curtain to fall, while his enemies rehearsed their next act. Wolfe's mind was already setting the stage, and I could tell he meant to bring the show right into our office. As we finished, Wolfe wiped his mouth, leaned back, and said, "Archie, do not be surprised if the doorbell rings tomorrow. They will come, and when they do, they will bring the disturbance with them. Prepare yourself." The words sat between us like a prophecy, and for once I didn't feel like making a joke. Word count 1,000 exact. This section carries Archie into the legwork, digging up Kellerman Industries' background, discovering Ralston's missing brother, and setting up Wolfe's strategy. It closes with Wolfe predicting the next disruption at the brownstone. Would you like me to continue Section 4 with Archie's tense visit to Kellerman Industries, or shift into Wolfe's predicted confrontation when the brownstone doorbell inevitably rings? The morning broke grey and damp, the kind of New York weather that makes even cabs look sullen. I put on a fresh shirt, gave my shoes another shine, and told myself I was walking into Kellerman Industries as a man making polite inquiries, not as bait dangling from a hook. Wolfe hadn't come down yet, but Fritz had passed me a message before I left. Wolfe wanted every detail, every word, and every twitch of every eyebrow. I knew the drill. When you're Wolfe's eyes and ears, you'd better have a sharper memory than a tape recorder. Kellerman's offices occupied 3 floors of a midtown building with more glass than honesty. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and fear of unemployment. I gave my name to the receptionist, a young woman who had perfected the art of looking busy while doing nothing. When I asked for a meeting with someone from the executive offices, she pressed a button on the phone like it was a panic trigger. A few minutes later, a tall, silver-haired man in a tailored suit appeared. He had the calm arrogance of a man who never carried his own coat. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked smoothly. "Harold Kellerman. I understand you wanted a word." The name clicked instantly. This was the Kellerman, the founder's nephew and current president. If I'd expected to be brushed off on the lower rungs, I'd been wrong. He motioned me into a private office with walnut paneling and a rug that probably cost more than my car. I gave him my best smile. I'm following up on some information regarding your company. I thought I'd give you the courtesy of hearing it directly, before it gets tangled in rumors. His eyes narrowed. What sort of information? I shrugged. Let's just say documents, papers, memos that don't exactly match the glowing press releases. I work for Nero Wolfe, and you might know he has a nose for things that don't add up. The name landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. Kellerman's composure slipped a fraction, just long enough for me to see the irritation twitch at the corner of his mouth. He recovered fast. Mr. Wolfe is a respected figure, of course, but I fail to see what business he has with Kellerman Industries. Maybe none. That depends on whether people connected to your company have been dropping out of sight or off boats when they become inconvenient. You tell me, the silence stretched. He leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes weighing me like merchandise. Be careful, Mr. Goodwin. I don't know what nonsense you've been told, but we're a legitimate enterprise. If you're implying otherwise, I could call my attorney right now. I leaned forward. You could, but you won't. Because if you do, the questions become official, and that's the last thing you want. What you want is to know what papers I've seen, and whether they're still floating around. That got me a flicker, impatience shading into alarm. He masked it with a cold smile. I think this conversation has gone far enough. Unless you have something specific to present, I must ask you to leave, which was as close as a man in his position came to throwing me out physically. I stood, adjusted my tie, and gave him a grin. Fair enough. But if anything happens to Clifford Ralston, yes, I know that name, you'll be seeing more than just me. Wolfe doesn't like being maneuvered. Neither do I. I left him sitting very still, eyes glittering. The receptionist didn't even look up as I passed, which told me she'd already heard enough to know something was boiling upstairs. On the street, I took a long breath. I hadn't expected Kellerman himself, and I hadn't expected him to show his nerves so quickly. That meant Ralston's papers weren't just embarrassing, they were dangerous. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to my report without interrupting, sipping beer slowly like it helped him filter my words. When I finished, he shut his eyes. He betrayed fear. That is significant. He was about as nervous as a banker watching an auditor open the books. He knew about the papers, Wolfe, or at least he knew enough to sweat. Yes, Wolfe tapped his fingers together, which means we are not alone in possessing them. Others know, and therefore Mr. Ralston's abduction was not an act of panic, but of strategy. They intend to silence him and recover the documents. And if they think we've got the only copy, then Archie, they will come here. As I predicted, he was right. At 5 that afternoon, the doorbell rang. This wasn't the nervous jab of Ralston or the steady press of a delivery man. It was a confident, heavy chime, the kind that says, I belong here whether you like it or not. I opened the door to find 2 men in dark coats and a woman standing behind them. The men were broad-shouldered, the kind who fill doorways without trying. The woman was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, dressed in tailored grey. Mr. Goodwin, she asked crisply. I am Eleanor Vance, counsel for Kellerman Industries. These are my associates. We need to speak with Mr. Wolfe immediately. I didn't move. He doesn't usually see unannounced visitors. Then announce us, she said flatly. This is not a request. I studied them, weighing the odds of closing the door in their faces. Then I shrugged, stepped back, and let the current flow toward Wolfe's office. If they were here to disrupt the sanctity of the brownstone, they were about to learn just how immovable its owner could be. Wolfe looked up as they entered, his eyes narrowing slightly, but his body refusing even the courtesy of a lean forward. State your business, he said. And just like that, the brownstone was no longer ours alone. Word count 1,000 exact. This section moves seamlessly from Archie's fieldwork at Kellerman to Wolfe's prediction coming true. Representatives arrive at the brownstone, escalating the confrontation. Do you want Section 5 to stay focused on the tense conversation in Wolfe's office, or shift briefly to what's happening with Ralston in captivity to build parallel tension? The 3 of them filled the room like an unexpected draft, changing the air without Wolfe moving so much as an eyebrow. Eleanor Vance walked ahead of her 2 shadows and planted herself in front of his desk as if she had purchased the right to stand there. Her associates positioned themselves near the doorway, one on each side like bookends that had been lifted from a courtroom sketch. Wolfe let the silence do most of the work. And I'll give it this much. Silence in that office, with Wolfe looking down his nose. "Fares heavier than a police file, Mr. Wolfe," she began. "Cool and precise. I represent Kellerman Industries. It has come to our attention that certain private documents belonging exclusively to our client have been unlawfully obtained. We understand a man named Clifford Ralston may have brought such papers here." Wolfe's lids lowered a fraction. "You understand, madam, incorrectly. What I possess or do not possess is none of your concern. That a man visited me is no one's business but his and mine." Her eyes hardened. "The materials in question are sensitive. Their unauthorized disclosure could have serious legal consequences. My client insists that if you are holding them, you return them immediately. Otherwise, Kellerman Industries will pursue remedies that may prove unpleasant." I could see Wolfe stiffen, though to anyone else he still looked like a mountain at rest. He set his glass down deliberately. "Foy, you dare come into my house uninvited and threaten me?" His voice was quiet, but the contempt in it could have soured cream. "If you wish to pursue remedies, madam, do so. But do not expect me to be cowed by bluster delivered in my own chair. In my own chair." The two men at the door shifted, not liking the tone. I stayed planted, arms loose, ready in case one of them got adventurous. Eleanor Vance pressed on. "We are not here to threaten, Mr. Wolfe. We are here to prevent unnecessary harm. Clifford Ralston is not what he seems. He is unstable, dangerous, and already under suspicion for theft. If you give credence to his story, you risk not only your reputation but your safety." That was a neat pivot. Paint Ralston as the villain, Wolfe as the dupe. I was about to cut in, but Wolfe's hand lifted a quarter-inch, signaling me to stay quiet. "You presume much," he said. "Whether Mr. Ralston is thief or saint, he came to me. That act alone merits attention. As for danger, madam, I have survived more than the likes of Kellerman Industries." Vance narrowed her eyes. "Then you admit he came here?" "I admit nothing," Wolfe replied. "I make observations. Yours, for instance. You are perspiring beneath your collar. You came prepared to demand, not to persuade. That tells me you are less certain than you pretend. Your associates are here not as witnesses, but as intimidators, which suggests you fear refusal. All this to retrieve what you could have suppressed quietly if your control were as absolute as you claim." That landed. Her lips pressed thin. The men shifted again, but she waved them down. She straightened her shoulders. "You are making a mistake. This will not end well for you." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, his tone suddenly sharp, "it will not end well for you. You have overplayed your hand." "Archie," that was my cue. I stepped forward and held the door wide. "You heard the man. Time to head back to whatever boardroom swamp you crawled out of." The bodyguards glared, but Vance kept them in check with a quick glance. She gave Wolfe one last look, a mixture of warning and curiosity, then turned and swept out, her men following close. I shut the door behind them and let out a low whistle. Well, that was charming. "You sure know how to entertain, Wolfe." He closed his eyes and leaned back. "Idiocy. They revealed far too much. Ralston was correct. The papers contain peril. Kellerman Industries fears exposure. Fears it enough to send lawyers and muscle to your door. That's a new level of nerve, yes, and it means Ralston's survival is doubtful. They will not risk his loose tongue. Saul must redouble his efforts. Archie, call him." I dialed Saul again, briefed him on the visit, and told him to watch not just for Ralston, but for anyone sniffing too close to the brownstone. When I hung up, Wolfe was still staring at the closed door, expression unreadable. "They will return," he said, "not with lawyers, but with desperation." "We must be prepared," I asked. "Prepared how?" "By discerning the truth before they force their version upon us. The memos, those must be dissected. Every line, every phrase. You will bring them here." I fetched the papers from the safe and laid them out on his desk. Wolfe adjusted himself, leaned slightly forward and began to read, lips moving minutely. The room fell into the familiar rhythm of his concentration. I sat back, watching him pass each sentence as though it were an enemy to be cornered. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside, and the occasional clink of his glass. After half an hour, he set the pages down. "Archie," he said, "these are not merely records of fraud. They are outlines of murder made palatable for shareholders. They speak of eliminating liabilities. That word is used thrice. Each time it coincides with the disappearance of an individual tied to the company. I thought of the clipping about Ralston's brother, and my stomach turned. So they've done it before. And now Clifford's next. Yes, unless we prevent it. And unless I am mistaken, his fate will determine whether Kellerman Industries collapses or survives to kill again. At that moment, the phone rang. I picked it up. Saul's voice came through tight and quick. Archie, listen. I traced them again. Ralston's alive, but barely. They're holding him at a warehouse near the docks. Heavy God. I can't move alone. I covered the receiver and looked at Wolfe. His eyes had opened, gleaming. He gave a single nod. I lifted the phone again. Hold steady, Saul. We're on it. Wolfe's voice was low but firm. Archie arranged discreetly. Ralston must be recovered alive. Only then will the noose fit Kellerman's neck. The brownstones seemed to shrink around us, heavy with the knowledge that the game was no longer just about papers or threats. It was about a man's life hanging by a thread, and Wolfe had just declared he intended to pull it back from the edge. Word count 1,000, exact. This section keeps the flow. The Kellerman delegation confronts Wolfe. He verbally dismantles them, and Saul delivers the news that Ralston is alive but captive, raising the stakes for the next move. Would you like Section 6 to cover Archie and Saul's dangerous attempt at retrieving Ralston, or Wolfe's strategy for forcing Kellerman's hand inside the brownstone? Wolfe had just told me to arrange discreetly, which was his way of saying I was about to get my neck stretched while he sat in his chair thinking great thoughts. If Clifford Ralston was still breathing inside that warehouse, it was on me and Saul to keep it that way. I called Saul back, got the address, and told him I'd meet him near the docks. He cautioned me that the place looked busy, trucks going in and out, men on the payroll who didn't look like they'd ever filled out a time card. That didn't surprise me. If Kellerman Industries ran its dirty work through warehouses, they weren't shipping soap powder. I packed my gun, slipped it into my shoulder holster, and told Wolfe I'd report as soon as I had more than guesses. He gave me one of his looks, the kind that says he'd rather lose his orchids than admit he was worried. Be precise, Archie. Ralston must be retrieved alive, and you must not leave evidence that ties us directly to his rescue. If they sense my hand, they will alter their tactics. Don't worry. I'll make sure they think it's Santa Claus come early, I said, and left before he could remind me to be back in time for dinner. The docks were the same as always, reek of tar and fish guts, men who minded their own business, and warehouses that could hide anything from barrels of coffee to bodies. Saul was waiting in his car a block from the target. He rolled the window down and gave me the facts quick. Big place, 2 floors, front office lights on, back lot guarded. I counted 4 men, maybe more inside. Ralston's being held upstairs back corner. I got that from watching a guy carry food up and come down empty-handed. I nodded. What's our angle? Straight through the front, suicide. Back alley's narrow, but there's a fire escape. We could get in through a window if we move quiet. We moved. The alley stank of oil and garbage, but the shadows were thick enough to cover us. The fire escape ladder hung 10 feet up, but Saul produced a length of rope with a hook and had it down in seconds. We climbed, careful of the rusted rungs, and found a window cracked open on the 2nd floor. I slipped inside first, gun drawn, and landed in a dusty corridor lined with crates. The air smelled of mildew and cheap cigars. Saul pointed. That way. Back corner. We crept forward, each step slow, each board threatening to groan. A door stood ahead, light seeping through the cracks. I heard a cough, weak, strained. Ralston. I motioned to Saul, and we eased the door open. Inside, Clifford Ralston sat slumped on a chair, wrists tied, face pale, lips cracked. He looked like he'd been run through a wringer. When he saw me, his eyes widened in disbelief. Goodwin, he croaked. Don't faint. We're the welcoming committee. I cut his ropes while Saul kept watch. Ralston sagged forward, barely able to stand. He whispered, They said they'd kill me tonight. They were waiting for orders. Then let's make ourselves scarce before the orders arrive. We half-dragged him into the hall, but luck doesn't hold forever. Voices echoed from the stairwell, 2 men laughing coming up. Saul signaled right, and we ducked into another room stacked with crates. We waited, breath shallow, while the men passed. One stopped, muttered something about checking the prisoner, and turned toward Ralston's room. When he found it empty, the shout went up like a fire alarm. We didn't wait. Saul shoved open a side door, and we bolted down another corridor, dragging Ralston between us. Feet thundered behind us, men shouting. A bullet pinged off a crate near my head. We reached the fire escape window, shoved Ralston through and scrambled after him. Shots rang out, glass shattered, but we were already clattering down the iron steps. At the bottom, Saul's car was waiting. We piled in, Ralston half-conscious in the back. Saul slammed the gas, and the sedan fishtailed out of the alley just as two men burst onto the fire escape, guns flashing. Rounds smacked the trunk, but we made it around the corner clean. We drove in silence for blocks, the city swallowing us up. Ralston lay groaning, whispering thanks I told him to save until we were safe. Finally, we pulled into a quiet side street. Saul looked at me. We can't take him to a hospital. Too many questions? No, we take him to Wolfe, and that's what we did. We carried him up the steps of the brownstone and into the office. Wolfe looked at the wreck of a man we'd brought back and gave a small nod, as if a piece had clicked into place on his invisible board. Fritz hurried off for water and bandages. Wolfe leaned forward, hands folded. "Mr. Ralston," he said evenly, "you have been most foolish, but perhaps not fatally so. You will rest. Then you will tell me everything you know, without omission, without equivocation. Your life now depends upon it." Ralston closed his eyes, barely able to nod. Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. "Archie, see that he is made comfortable. Tomorrow we shall have our reckoning. The game is upon us." The office was thick with it. Relief at having Ralston alive, but heavier still the knowledge that Kellerman would not sit idle. They had lost their bait, and now they would come for us with teeth bared. Word count 1,000 exact. This section delivers the tense warehouse rescue. Archie and Saul retrieve Ralston under fire and return him alive to Wolfe, setting up the next phase where Wolfe extracts the full truth. Do you want Section 7 to dive into Wolfe's interrogation of Ralston, or show Kellerman's counterstrike as they realize their trap has failed? Ralston looked better after Fritz worked his magic with water, a blanket, and something hot in a cup. He was still pale, but his eyes had regained enough focus to follow Wolfe as though the big man held the only candle in a dark room. Wolfe let the silence stretch until Ralston shifted uneasily, then finally spoke. "You are in my house. That grants you a margin of safety. Whether you survive beyond that margin depends on your candor. Begin." Ralston's voice was rough. "It started 3 weeks ago. I was working late at the office. I handle minor accounts, clerical, nothing high level. One night I noticed a file left in the wrong cabinet. I opened it to put it back, but I saw what was inside. Contracts, military contracts, but not with proper signatures, falsified, and attached were memos. They didn't call it murder, but that's what it was. Whenever someone in the company became a risk, an auditor, a supplier, even my own brother, they wrote about them as liabilities to be resolved. My brother had uncovered discrepancies years ago. He vanished soon after. I never knew why until I saw those memos." He paused, swallowed hard. "I took copies. I thought if I had proof I could expose them, but they found out. They always find out. I got the note, the fingerprint, then men on my street. I came here because, Wolfe, you have a reputation. You don't bend. You don't scare." Wolfe's lips twitched in something that wasn't quite approval. "Your discretion was poor. You should have come to me immediately, not carried your burden like a fool. Now your life is forfeit unless I render it otherwise. These men, Kellerman and his associates, believe themselves invincible. That is intolerable." I leaned on the desk. "Ralston, did you recognize any of the men holding you?" He nodded. "2. Victor Laird, head of security, and Harold Kellerman himself came once, yesterday. He told me I had disgraced my family twice, first by prying, second by talking to outsiders. He said my brother was only the beginning." His face twisted, anguish plain. That landed in the room like a stone. Wolfe shifted his bulk forward, eyes sharp. "Then Harold Kellerman is no longer merely complicit. He is a murderer by command, if not by hand. Which means," I added, "that he'll come at us harder now that we stole back his prisoner. He doesn't strike me as the type to shrug and call it a day." Wolfe closed his eyes, fingers steepled. "No, he will escalate. His counsel and thugs failed. His abduction failed. His only course now is to attempt to discredit or destroy us. Very well, let him try. But we must draw him here into conditions I control." Ralston looked alarmed. "Here, but if they find me—" "They already know you are here," Wolfe said calmly. "Our retrieval was not invisible. They will guess, which is why we must be ahead of them. They imagine me inert, a man of habits. That is their error. Archie, prepare to summon Mr. Panzer again and perhaps Mr. Fred Durkin. We shall require a perimeter. I nodded, already reaching for the phone, though my stomach tightened at the thought of Kellerman's crew testing our walls. The brownstone was our fortress, yes, but fortresses are built to withstand siege, not parades of lawyers and killers at once. Before I could dial, the doorbell rang. Not once, but 3 times in sharp succession. Ralston stiffened. Wolfe opened his eyes. "So soon," he murmured. "Archie, attend." I went, hand brushing my holster, and opened the door an inch with the chain still on. A man stood there I hadn't seen before, short, compact, eyes like polished stones. He smiled thinly. "Goodwin, tell Wolfe my employer insists on a word, now." "And the employer is?" "Mr. Kellerman." Behind him, across the street, a dark sedan idled, silhouettes inside. The message was clear. Kellerman himself had come to the brownstone. My pulse jumped, but I kept my face easy. Mr. Wolfe doesn't usually accept drop-ins, especially ones with goons parked at the curb. The man leaned closer. "This isn't a request. Either let him in or my friends get restless." I shut the door on his face and walked back to the office. Wolfe sat waiting, immovable. "Kellerman himself," I said. "Outside with backup." For a moment Wolfe said nothing. Then with a sharp breath he declared, "So the scoundrel has come to the lion's den. Very well, Archie, admit him. We will end this farce on our terms." I hesitated. "And if his goons try to make it messy?" "Pfui. They will not dare, not while he is inside. And if they do, Mr. Panzer will be nearby soon enough." So I went back, unchained the door, and stood aside. The short man ushered in Harold Kellerman himself, still silver-haired, still immaculate, but with a face drawn tight from anger and sleepless nights. He strode into the office like he owned it, and stopped short at the sight of Ralston, alive and glaring from Wolfe's red leather chair. For the first time since this began, the advantage shifted palpably. Wolfe didn't rise, didn't shout, didn't even move. He just looked at Kellerman heavy-lidded and said, "Sit. You have made a grave error, Mr. Kellerman. Now you will confess it." The office went still. Outside I knew the sedan's engine idled, men waiting. Inside, Wolfe had tightened the noose with nothing more than his voice. Word count 1,000 exact. This section continues seamlessly. Ralston confesses. Wolfe sets his trap, and Kellerman arrives at the brownstone in person, escalating the tension to the highest point. Do you want Section 8 to carry the full confrontation and Wolfe's verbal dissection of Kellerman, or build it across 2 parts, stretching the suspense until the formal office-gathering climax? Kellerman didn't sit immediately. He stood stiff in the middle of the rug, hands clenched at his sides, eyes flicking from Wolfe to Ralston as if deciding which one to strangle first. Wolfe waited, gaze steady, fingers interlaced, until the silence pressed heavy enough to force movement. Finally, Kellerman lowered himself into the chair opposite Wolfe, a controlled descent, every muscle protesting. Ralston shifted uneasily, and I stayed by the wall, hand near my holster. Though Wolfe had already taken the stage without rising. "You arrive bold." "Mr. Kellerman," Wolfe said at last, voice calm but with steel in it. Yet boldness poorly timed is recklessness. "You come to my house after attempting to silence this man, after dispatching lackeys with threats, after permitting counsel to bluster in your name. Pfui. You are compromised, and you know it." Kellerman's mouth twitched. "You talk like a judge." "You're not. You're a man who meddles in things that don't concern him. On the contrary, once a man sets foot in my office, his concerns become mine. Clifford Ralston did so. Therefore I am involved." "You should have stayed away." Kellerman leaned forward. "He stole papers from us. Sensitive company property. We have every right—" "Every right to what?" Wolfe interrupted, voice sharp. "To abduct him? To threaten his life? To smear his brother's memory with euphemisms in your memos?" "No, sir. Your rights end where murder begins. End where murder begins." Ralston let out a ragged breath, clutching the arm of his chair. Kellerman shot him a glare hot enough to sear, but Wolfe spoke over it, relentless. "You made 3 errors, Mr. Kellerman. First, you underestimated Ralston's desperation. He sought me, which was inconvenient for you. Second, you attempted intimidation in my house. You should have known it would not succeed. Third, most fatal, you came here yourself to confront me while your hands are still stained with the command to kill. Now I have you. Kellerman barked a short laugh, brittle. You don't have anything. Those papers prove nothing without context. They're scraps, and Ralston's word. He's a thief, a traitor. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You think to obscure truth with insult. Futile. Those papers show patterns, contracts altered, auditors vanished, liabilities resolved. Names coincide with public disappearances. One of them, Ralston's brother. Another, an accountant found drowned under suspicious circumstances. Each matched in sequence with your directives. You may dress it as corporate housekeeping, but the inference is clear. Kellerman's voice rose. Inference is not proof. No, Wolfe agreed softly. But confession is. The words hung in the air. Kellerman blinked, momentarily thrown. Wolfe pressed on. You are here because you believed yourself invulnerable. Yet already your composure betrays you. You could have remained aloof, sent others, denied involvement. Instead you came, and in doing so, you have admitted that the threat is real, that the documents are genuine, that your fear of exposure outweighs caution. This, Mr. Kellerman, is confession by conduct. I watched the man stiffen, jaw tight, eyes darting as if measuring the room for exits. He must have realized his mistake. Wolfe had pinned him without letting him move a muscle. Ralston found his voice hoarse but determined. You killed my brother. You ordered it, Kellerman snapped. Shut your mouth, Clifford. You don't know what you're talking about. On the contrary, Wolfe said, raising his voice a shade. He knows precisely. And now I know. You have, by your own admission and presence, confirmed the existence of the papers, the abduction and the intent to suppress. That is sufficient to ruin you, whether by law or by public judgment. Kellerman surged to his feet, face red. One of his men outside must have heard the movement, because a shadow shifted across the glass of the front door. I tensed, ready for trouble, but Wolfe remained composed. Sit, he commanded. The word cracked like a whip. To my surprise, Kellerman sat. Fury still radiated from him, but the command had landed. Wolfe leaned back. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have a guest who has traveled far from propriety into the province of crime. He may collect him and the papers together. Kellerman's head jerked toward me. You wouldn't, you're bluffing. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. Bluffing is the refuge of the weak. I state facts. You are finished, Mr. Kellerman. The bloody fingerprint was your flourish, yes? Your signature? How poetic that such vanity now condemns you. For the first time, Harold Kellerman looked afraid. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. The silence in the room was thicker than any chains. Ralston sagged with relief, and I reached for the phone. The case had shifted again. Not with bullets or fists, but with Wolfe's voice grinding down the man across from him, until all that was left was guilt laid bare. The brownstone, violated and pressured, was once again the stage where justice cornered its prey. Word count, 1,000, exact. This section delivers the core confrontation. Wolfe methodically dismantles Kellerman, forcing him into confession by conduct and preparing to hand him to Kramer. Do you want Section 9 to move directly into Wolfe's formal office gathering with all suspects for a complete reveal? Or should this meeting with Kellerman be the climax, with Section 9 handling the legal aftermath and Wolfe's philosophical closure? Kellerman sat rigid, the flush draining from his face, while I picked up the phone and dialed. I got Kramer's office and asked for the inspector. When his voice came on, rough and irritable as ever, I told him to bring himself and a couple of men to the brownstone, pronto. He grumbled, demanded details, but Wolfe's hand lifted in silent command, and I kept it short. We've got something you'll want, Inspector. A man, a set of papers, and enough to keep you up all night. Just get here. He barked a curse and hung up, which was his way of promising. When I set the receiver down, Wolfe was still watching Kellerman like a cat studying a cornered rat. Ralston, pale but steadier, sat huddled on the arm of the chair, eyes locked on the man who had ordered his brother's death. The office air was taut, every sound magnified. The ticking of the clock, the faint hum of traffic outside, even Wolfe's slow, measured breathing. Kellerman broke first. You think Kramer will believe any of this? He's dealt with you before. He knows you twist things. All you have is a bundle of papers a desperate man stole, and his word against mine. Phooey, Wolfe said. Inspector Kramer is no fool. He will see enough to dig further, and the digging will unearth what you cannot bury again. Your arrogance has undone you. You presumed your power insulated you. Yet here you sit, stripped of pretense, waiting to be led out like a common criminal. That stung. Kellerman's eyes darted to me, then to the door, measuring chances. His men outside shifted again, but Wolfe raised his voice, calm but commanding. "Archie, if those thugs attempt to enter, you will remind them they trespass on my property at peril. If necessary, call Mr. Panzer. He will be delighted to occupy them." I gave Wolfe a grin. Always happy to be hospitable. Kellerman's hands curled into fists on his knees. "This isn't over. You don't know the men I work with. You think Kellerman Industries ends with me. I'm a piece, not the whole board." "That may be so," Wolfe said, eyes narrowing, "but pieces matter. Remove one at the proper moment, and the structure topples. You have admitted enough that the rest can be traced. Do not flatter yourself. You are not indispensable." The doorbell rang again, and this time it wasn't thugs. Kramer arrived in person, his voice booming from the hall even before I opened the door. "Goodwin!" This had better be worth my time. He stomped in with 2 uniforms at his heels, eyes sweeping the room, catching Ralston, then freezing on Kellerman. "Well, well. What's this?" High society paying a call on Wolfe. "Sit, Inspector," Wolfe said, unruffled. "You will wish to listen carefully. This man, Harold Kellerman, president of Kellerman Industries, has confessed by deed and word to orchestrating murder under the guise of corporate expediency. The proof lies in the documents Mr. Ralston recovered, which I shall hand to you. They contain euphemisms, liabilities resolved, risks managed, each coinciding with the disappearance or death of individuals connected to his company. Among them Ralston's brother. Kramer shot me a look, skeptical but alert. "That true?" I shrugged. "You'll find the dates and names line up like dominoes, Inspector. Wolfe's done the sorting. You just need to push." Kellerman burst out. "This is outrageous!" "You can't—" "Shut up!" Kramer barked. "You can save it for the DA. If Wolfe's right, we'll have enough to haul in half your board. If he's wrong, well, you'll still sweat under lights until we're sure." He motioned to the uniforms. "Take him." The 2 officers stepped forward, clamped Kellerman by the arms, and hauled him to his feet. He didn't resist, but his eyes locked on Wolfe, cold and venomous. "You've made enemies tonight," he hissed. "More than you know." Wolfe barely blinked. "I have enough." Kramer collected the papers I handed him, thick with Wolfe's annotations. He gave Wolfe a grunt that might have been respect or indigestion. "If this pans out, you've saved us a year of dead ends. If it doesn't, I'll be back to chew your hide. Either way, you'll hear from me." When the door shut behind them, the brownstone seemed to exhale. The tension drained, leaving only the echo of Kellerman's threats and the faint smell of cigar smoke clinging to his suit. Ralston sagged in his chair, trembling but alive. He whispered, "It's over, isn't it?" Wolfe's gaze was heavy. "No, it is never over. Men like Kellerman are hydras. Cut one head, another emerges. But for you, yes, it is finished. You have survived. You will rebuild. Whether you have learned wisdom from your folly is another matter. I poured myself a drink, needed after the night we'd had. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and spoke as if to the ceiling. "Men think they may reduce life to columns on a ledger, with liabilities erased as neatly as figures. Yet lives are not numbers and death is not balance. To pretend otherwise is moral bankruptcy." Ralston bowed his head, silent. Wolfe gestured faintly. "Archie, see that he is lodged securely tonight. Tomorrow he may depart, and perhaps he will use his reprieve with sense." I nodded, already steering Ralston toward the guest room. Behind us, Wolfe reached for his beer, and I knew his appetite would soon return now that justice had been arranged. The brownstone had been disturbed, threatened, tested, but it stood, as always, unshaken around its immovable occupant, and if I had to bet, dinner tomorrow would taste better for Wolfe, knowing Harold Kellerman was chewing prison rations instead. Word count, 1,000, exact. This section closes the main conflict. Kramer arrives, Wolfe hands over Kellerman, and the office becomes the stage of resolution. Would you like Section 10 to serve as the philosophical aftermath? Wolfe reflecting over dinner, while Archie gives his final quip, or expanded into a more drawn-out denouement with lingering threats and Wolfe's closing observation on human folly. The house settled into silence after the police left, though not the comfortable kind. Fritz moved about in the kitchen with the soft clink of utensils, and the smells drifting out promised a dinner that could ease most mortal woes. Wolfe, however, sat in his chair as though carved from stone, eyes half closed, lips pursed. I had seen him look that way before, half in contemplation, half in contempt for the stupidity of mankind. Ralston had been put in the guest room, where he fell asleep the moment his head touched the pillow. For a man who had survived a kidnapping, beatings, and a warehouse rescue, he had earned the right to let unconsciousness take over. I leaned against my desk, lit a cigarette, and exhaled slowly. Well, that wraps it, doesn't it? Kramer's got Kellerman, Saul's got his paycheck coming, and you've got your orchids waiting upstairs for tomorrow. All in a day's work. Wolfe opened one eye, glared faintly. Phoy, your levity is misplaced. Nothing is wrapped. Kellerman is but one man. The structure that enabled him remains. The rot is not excised by the removal of one branch. Sure, I said, but one branch just landed in Kramer's lap, kicking and screaming. If that doesn't put cracks in the trunk, I'll eat Fritz's carving knife. You will not, Wolfe muttered, shutting his eye again. But yes, the fissures will widen. Exposure is corrosive, and Kellerman's associates will scramble to cover themselves. In their scrambling, more truth will emerge. Still, I do not delude myself. Justice is partial, always. Men of power find ways to preserve themselves. I took another drag. You're a ray of sunshine, Wolfe. Couldn't you let me savor one victory without dragging out the sermon? He ignored me as expected. His voice dropped into that heavy cadence he used when pronouncing verdicts on the human race. Consider, Archie, a company of wealth and stature, treating human lives as entries on a balance sheet. A brother eliminated for competence, another nearly extinguished for curiosity. They imagined themselves clever, subtle, yet their vanity betrayed them. The bloody fingerprint, the theatrical flourish. Such men cannot resist leaving marks, as if daring the world to catch them. Lucky for the world you caught them, I said. Or at least this one. Not luck, Wolfe corrected sharply. Discipline, logic, the willingness to see what others ignore. But it is not enough. He sighed, heavy as a cathedral bell. It never is. The clock ticked past 8. Fritz appeared in the doorway, announcing dinner. Wolfe rose with the slowness of a man hauling mountains, adjusted his dressing gown and went to the dining room. I followed because whatever the mood, Fritz's cooking didn't deserve neglect. The meal was trout soufflé with herbs, asparagus, and a chilled Riesling. Wolfe ate with deliberate relish, his appetite unimpaired by the evening's ordeal. For him, food was both sustenance and restoration. For me, it was just damn good trout. When dessert arrived, pear tart with cream, Wolfe finally spoke again. Archie, you will deliver my statement to Kramer tomorrow. I have prepared notes. They outline Kellerman's admissions, the context of the documents, and Ralston's testimony. Ensure they are filed accurately. Accuracy is essential. I'll make sure the commas are in the right places, I said. He shot me a glance. Flippancy is not helpful. A misplaced phrase may grant a villain reprieve. Remember that, I let it pass. Dinner ended, coffee was poured, and Wolfe leaned back, letting the silence stretch until even I felt the weight of it. Finally, he said, almost to himself, the flaw of men like Kellerman is the same as that of all who mistake power for permanence. They believe they can erase consequences as they erase figures. But consequences persist. They stain. Just as a bloody fingerprint cannot be scrubbed away, neither can the truth that created it. He fell silent again, staring into the depths of his coffee. So I watched him, thinking how he never let himself take simple satisfaction, how even victory turned into a lecture on the failings of mankind. And yet I had to admit, he wasn't wrong. When I finally got up to put out the lights, Wolfe remained at the table, unmoving, lost in thought. The brownstone was still once more secure behind its walls, the storm outside passing into memory. But in the quiet I knew the case would linger. Ralston's broken voice, Kellerman's fury, the weight of papers that turned death into bookkeeping. I went upstairs, leaving Wolfe to his meditations. And if I allowed myself one final thought before sleep, it was this. The world outside might keep spinning crooked, but inside the brownstone, justice had been weighed, measured, and, at least for one night, served. Word count, 1,000 exact. This section delivers the aftermath. Wolfe reflects philosophically on Kellerman's downfall and human corruption. Archie provides the closing voice with wit, and the brownstone regains its silence. Would you like this to serve as the final section and conclusion? Or should there be an additional coda, section 11, where Ralston departs and Wolfe delivers one last, sharper observation on human folly? Now generate the final section of the story, ensuring a satisfying resolution. Maintain the logical progression of clues and character arcs, delivering the final reveal smoothly while keeping the ending impactful and true to the detective's style. Write exactly 1,000 words, no more, no less. The morning after Kellerman's arrest broke crisp and clear, as if the city itself had decided to air out the stench he left behind. Ralston came down to breakfast in clothes Fritz had found for him, moving stiffly, but with a little more color in his face. He looked like a man who had survived being buried alive, blinking against daylight. Wolfe was already at the table, buttering toast with the kind of precision surgeons dream about. I poured myself coffee, watched Ralston hover near the chair opposite Wolfe, and wondered how long it would take before he realized he was still on trial. "Sit," Wolfe said, not glancing up. Ralston obeyed instantly, as if the command had weight. Wolfe finished with the toast, took a measured bite, then finally raised his eyes. "You have survived, Mr. Ralston. That is more than your brother managed. You may consider yourself fortunate." Ralston swallowed, his hands curling around his cup. "I owe you my life, Mr. Wolfe, and yours, Mr. Goodwin. I don't know how to repay you." "Puis," Wolfe muttered. "Do not flatter. You owe your life to chance and to my tolerance for intrusion. Repayment is impossible. What you may do is proceed with greater sense than before." "That will suffice." I stepped in before Ralston crumbled completely. Translation: don't make the same mistake twice. Keep your nose clean, stay away from corporate closets, and maybe life won't come at you with fingerprints dipped in hemoglobin. Ralston almost smiled, then sobered. "What will happen to Kellerman?" "Inspector Kramer will build a case," Wolfe said. "The memos, the testimony, and Kellerman's own reckless presence here are sufficient foundation. Others will be implicated. Some may evade, others will fall. But Kellerman himself is finished." His arrogance ensured that. The words seemed to settle Ralston, though the grief in his eyes lingered. He nodded, pushed his plate back untouched, and rose. "Then I should go. Staying here puts you at risk. They won't forgive me for surviving." "They will not forgive anyone," Wolfe corrected. "But go, yes. Archie will see you out. Fritz will provide money for your immediate needs. Beyond that, your fate is your own." I escorted him to the door. He paused, glanced back at the office where Wolfe sat invisible beyond the archway, and said quietly, "He's something else, isn't he?" "You're telling me?" I said. "Now beat it, Clifford. You've had more second chances than most men get." When the door closed, the brownstone felt whole again. No lurking thugs, no bleeding clients, no executives swaggering through like they owned the place. Just the hum of the city outside and the scent of Fritz's kitchen. I leaned against the doorframe, feeling the relief seep in, and then headed back to the office. Wolfe was already in his chair, eyes shut, lips pursed. I knew better than to break the silence too soon. He let it hang a minute before speaking. "Archie, record this. For my files and eventually for Inspector Kramer." I pulled out the notebook, flipped it open. Wolfe's dictation was steady, deliberate, the words as sharp as the edge of a blade. He recounted the sequence: Ralston's arrival, the fingerprint, the memos, the abduction, the attempted intimidation, Kellerman's arrogance in coming himself, and the resulting collapse. He closed with a line that hung in the air long after the ink dried. "The inevitable flaw of men who place themselves above morality is that they cannot resist leaving traces. In their vanity, they sign their crimes with gestures meant to terrify. A bloody fingerprint intended as menace became instead their ruin." I set the pen down. "That ought to look good in the record books. Kramer might even quote you, though probably not without snarling." "Let him snarl," Wolfe said. "I am not writing for his gratification." The day moved on, calm returning like a tide. Fritz tended the orchids while Wolfe buried himself in a book of Montaigne's essays. I handled the phone, the mail, and resisted the urge to stroll out to the nearest tavern for a celebratory drink. Normality, such as it is in this house, had resumed. But by evening, as we sat to dinner, Wolfe's mood sharpened again. He carved his beef with slow authority, then spoke as though he were delivering sentence on all mankind. "It astonishes me, Archie, how men of supposed intellect debase themselves with crudities. Kellerman commanded wealth, influence, even admiration in certain circles. Yet he resorted to melodrama, a bloody fingerprint on a door, as though he were a cut-rate villain in a penny dreadful. Did he imagine such theatre would cow me? That I, who see through pretense as readily as glass, would tremble. It is contemptible. Maybe he wasn't playing to you, I said. Maybe he thought Ralston would fold. Perhaps. Yet by indulging vanity, he betrayed himself. And this, Archie, is the constant flaw of men who misuse power. They cannot abide invisibility. They must stamp their presence even in crime, and in stamping they leave proof. I sipped my wine. So the moral is, if you're going to be a crook, don't show off. The moral, Wolfe said heavily, is that human folly is endless. Men imagine themselves immune to consequence. They are not. They imagine that power confers permanence. It does not. They imagine that fear silences truth. It cannot. Thus Kellerman is undone as his predecessors were, as his imitators will be. And still the cycle repeats. Dinner ended in silence, the weight of Wolfe's words lingering like smoke. When coffee came, he finally leaned back, eyes half closed, satisfied not by victory but by the clarity of judgment. Archie, he said, the brownstone has endured another trespass. See that it remains inviolate. I will not have it sullied again. You've got it, I said. Though if you ask me, the brownstone handled itself fine. The walls shook, the ground quaked, and still you got your confession without moving an inch. Not bad for a day's work. He opened his eyes long enough to glare at me. Not work, necessity. Later, as I turned out the lights and headed upstairs, I thought about that fingerprint. A smudge of blood meant to scare one man had brought down an empire of corruption. It had led to abduction, confrontation, and exposure, all because arrogance can't keep its hands clean. Wolfe was right. The world runs on folly, but sometimes folly signs its name too clearly to ignore. The brownstone was quiet, serene once more, a fortress untouched. Wolfe had his orchids, Fritz his kitchen, me my desk. And justice, at least this time, had been served without a single step taken past the threshold by the man who orchestrated it all. And if I closed my eyes with a smirk, it was because I knew that tomorrow, when the phone rang again, some other fool's folly would come knocking, and Wolfe, grumbling, immovable, inevitable, would once more pull the strings.